United States, Bellwood, Illinois, March 18, 2015. Many believe that we are alone in the universe. However, one day something inexplicable happened. Something that forced us to ask ourselves, is this really true? Linda Halloway, 35 years old elementary school teacher, led a quiet and somewhat monotonous life in the town of Bellwood, on the western outskirts of Chicago. Linda lived alone in a small house on the edge of town, which she had inherited from her parents. The house, though modest, had the charm of an old brick building, surrounded by an overgrown garden that hadn't been tended to in years. Every morning, Linda made herself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and gazed out the window at the gray, gloomy streets of Bellwood. Her day began with a calm drive to work, where she taught children mathematics, trying to spark a love for numbers and geometry in them. Though her life seemed ordinary, she was content with it, until the fateful night that changed everything. Her days were filled with work, conversations with students and colleagues, as well as evening meetups with her friend Alice at the local cafe. Alice, energetic and full of life, often urged Linda to go to the city and try something new, but Linda was resistant to change. It was a quiet, starless night. She was returning home later than usual. The clock in her car showed 11:47 p.m. The road home was almost empty, only occasional house lights were visible, and streetlights cast long shadows on the asphalt. She was driving through a densely wooded area, when suddenly, a bright, pulsating light appeared in the sky. It was a strange phenomenon, unlike any light she had ever seen. It had an almost organic quality, alive, pulsating, shifting colors from intense blue to deep violet. Linda didn't know what to do. Her first instinct was to stop the car, which she did. She pulled over, leaned out the window, and looked up. The light didn't disappear. On the contrary, it seemed to be moving toward her. Her heart began to race, but at the same time, something fascinated her, pulling her toward this unknown phenomenon. After a moment, she decided to start the engine and drive away, and just then, the light suddenly vanished. She sped up, heading home, but after a few minutes she saw the same light again. This time it was even closer, and as it approached, she began to feel a strange, overwhelming headache. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to maintain control of the car, but her hands began to tremble. It felt as though something inside her was breaking, as if a barrier had been breached. She stopped abruptly, and silence enveloped her. The light vanished again, as if swallowed by the night sky. Linda tried to take a few deep breaths and move on when suddenly, darkness fell. Not the darkness of night, but something thicker, more absolute. Her hands clutched the steering wheel, but she couldn't move it. Everything around her froze. She had the feeling that time had stopped. She thought she might have fainted, but at the same time, she was sure she hadn't lost consciousness. Everything happened in an instant. In that moment, an invisible force entered the car and began to affect Linda. She felt as though something around her was starting to change. Without her conscious action, the car doors opened on their own, and she was gently pulled outside. Her body was stiff. She couldn't move or scream. Her entire body began to tingle, as if thousands of needles pierced her skin. The light returned, brighter and more overwhelming than before. Linda felt her body lifting, losing contact with the ground. Her eyes opened wide, and her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Everything in her mind screamed for help, but her body wouldn't respond. Strange, undefined shapes appeared around her. She was suspended in a void between light and darkness. She felt like she was inside something resembling a chamber, without walls, without a floor, without a ceiling. Everything was cold, smooth, and metallic. She lost track of time. It could have been seconds, minutes, or hours. She wasn't able to tell. As her eyes slowly adjusted to the intense light, she began to make out shapes. She was in a place that resembled a laboratory, cold, soundless, with metal tables and strange blinking devices. The air had a strange smell, like a mix of metal and ozone. Next to her stood beings, 4, maybe 5. They were tall, with elongated bodies and large dark eyes. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes, those eyes were something more. They seemed to pierce through her soul, as if they wanted to read all her secrets. Their skin was gray, almost silver, and their movements were fluid and silent. Linda tried to scream, but no sound came out. One of them approached her and placed something cold on her forehead. Suddenly, she felt her thoughts starting to swirl. It was as if someone was searching through her mind, flipping through her memories like pages in a book. She saw images from her childhood, faces of loved ones, forgotten moments. Everything flashed before her eyes at a dizzying speed. The being moved away for a moment, and Linda regained some awareness. She looked up and noticed that the ceiling was covered in strange symbols, which seemed to shift and flicker in sync with a sound unknown to her. These symbols were unlike anything she had ever seen before, resembling ancient writing or hieroglyphs, but completely alien and incomprehensible. Linda began to tremble. Everything was unfamiliar, unintelligible, and she was utterly defenseless. The beings around her communicated with each other, but not in a way she understood. Their mouths didn't move. She only heard a faint hum, as if they were communicating telepathically. She closed her eyes, trying to calm herself, but it only made things worse. She began to see images she couldn't comprehend. Strange landscapes, massive spaceships, other worlds. Everything was so intense and terrifying that it felt as if her mind was about to explode. One of the beings approached with a device that resembled a small metal cylinder. It touched her hand, and Linda felt a piercing pain. She screamed, though no sound escaped her lips. Another being came closer with a different device, which emitted a faint vibrating sound. Linda began to feel a strong burning pain in her head. It felt as if something was about to tear her skull in half. Minutes passed like hours. Linda felt her mind drifting, sinking into something deep and unknown. Her body was possessed by something not of this world. Everything was strange and unnatural. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself standing in a large, round room surrounded by translucent walls that seemed to ripple. Through these walls, she observed strange landscapes. Something resembling other planets, bizarre cities, and flying objects. Her mind couldn't process it. She felt as though she were on the edge of reality and a dream, as if her mind was splitting into multiple layers. She saw one of the beings approaching her, holding a strange, shimmering device. She began to feel her body rising again, as if she were nothing more than a speck of dust in the wind. The world around her blurred once more, and she lost consciousness again. Linda woke suddenly, lying on the grass at the edge of a forest, several hundred meters from her home. She felt the cold earth beneath her, and her body was heavy and exhausted. Her clothes were torn, and the skin on her arms bore strange marks, like burns. Everything around her was silent. She opened her eyes, and for a moment didn't know where she was. Slowly, she began to regain consciousness and understand what had happened. She was confused. Her body ached, but she knew she had to get up. She stood slowly, feeling every muscle, every beat of her heart. She knew this wasn't a dream or some hallucination. What had happened was real. She had proof, the strange marks on her body. With difficulty, she stood up and headed toward her house. She noticed that the sky was already light. The sun was rising slowly, and her car was still parked in the middle of the road, with the door open. She had a strange feeling that she was being watched, but there was no one around. Finally, she reached her house. She went inside and closed the door, trying to catch her breath. She heard the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen and saw that it was 5:12 a.m. She had spent the entire night outside, not even knowing how or when she ended up there. She decided to call Alice, her friend, to tell her what had happened. The phone was dead. She tried over and over, but the line seemed cut off. Finally, she collapsed onto the couch, feeling that she no longer had the strength to fight. The next day, she went to the local doctor to examine the strange marks on her body. Dr. Morgan was shocked by what he saw. The burns appeared fresh, but he couldn't explain how they had happened. Linda felt even more lost and terrified. Linda returned home, trying not to think about what had happened, but her nightmares grew more intense. She saw aliens, lights, felt the pain, and the inexplicable presence. Every night she woke up screaming, cold and drenched in sweat. She tried to tell Alice everything, but Alice thought Linda was just having sleep problems or going through some kind of trauma. She began searching for answers. She browsed internet forums, read articles about UFO abductions, and contacted people who claimed to have had similar experiences. She met with several ufologists who were fascinated by her story, but most of them seemed more interested in publicity than genuinely helping her. Linda became increasingly withdrawn. Her work began to suffer. Students noticed she was distracted and anxious. The school principal, Mr. Reynolds, called her into his office, asking if everything was all right. She didn't know what to say. She had no idea how to explain what had happened. Soon after, she noticed strange symptoms in her body. The skin where the burns had been started healing rapidly, and Linda felt her senses becoming sharper. She could see better in the dark, hear faint sounds that would normally be inaudible. Linda started keeping a journal, documenting every detail of her life, every new symptom, every strange event. Her physical health was deteriorating, yet at the same time, she felt her mind becoming stronger. She could focus on details that used to escape her notice, perceiving things that once seemed invisible. Although she tried to return to normal, her sense of safety was shattered by mysterious men in black suits and sunglasses who seemed to be following her every move. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. She saw the same men in various places daily, during her walks, drives to work, and even at the grocery store. Initially, she didn't pay much attention, but over time, their presence began to worry her. The men always stayed in the shadows, remaining unnoticed, but Linda started to sense their presence. One day, after a long day at school, she saw one of them sitting in a car parked near her house. The man was wearing sunglasses, even though it was night. Linda tried to ignore them, but each day it became harder. She began looking for solutions. One idea was to keep a detailed journal of every time she noticed the mysterious men. Over time, she discovered they appeared in a pattern, always near her home or places she frequented. She decided to confront the situation. One evening, when she noticed the men nearby again, she chose to speak to one of them. As the man left his car and headed toward a nearby park, Linda decided to follow him. In the park, under the cover of night, she dared to approach. The man, dressed in a black suit and sunglasses, stood by a lamppost, talking on a cell phone. Linda couldn't hear the conversation. Feeling this was her chance, she moved closer. Suddenly, the man turned and noticed her. His face was hidden behind his sunglasses, but Linda could sense he was aware of her presence. She began to retreat, but it was too late. The man approached her. "Ms. Holloway," he began, his voice calm but tense. Linda felt her heart race. "Yes, it's me. Who are you? And why are you following me?" The man looked at her intently, but didn't answer right away. His eyes were concealed by dark glasses that seemed almost impenetrable at night. "We are not here to harm you. We need to ensure that you are safe." Linda was taken aback. "Safe? In what way? What's going on?" The man paused for a moment. "We can't explain everything right now, but please trust us. Our actions are to protect you and your safety." Linda was confused and frightened. "Does this have something to do with the abduction I went through? Are you involved in what happened to me?" The man remained silent for a long moment. "My time is up." With those words, the man quickly walked away, getting into a car waiting nearby. Linda stood there for a moment, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Though the man assured her of her safety, his mystery left her with more questions than answers. In the following days, Linda noticed that the men stopped following her. She felt relieved, but she also remained vigilant. She knew she might be able to return to normalcy, but she was aware that the mysterious events she had experienced might still have consequences. As time passed, Linda tried to move on with her life, but memories of the men in suits lingered in her mind. She felt that what had happened was part of a larger puzzle that remained unclear. She had to continue living, striving to find balance in her everyday life. But she never forgot the mysterious men who had disappeared from her life as suddenly as they had appeared. And so, Linda Holloway continued her life, hoping that one day all the pieces of this complex puzzle would fall into place and that she would find answers to the questions that still remained. Linda Holloway of Bellwood, a woman who had experienced the unknown, had now become an enigma to those who might ever try to understand her. Linda's story is full of uncertainty and darkness. Was she merely a victim of an experiment? Or perhaps her body and mind were the key to something greater, something beyond human comprehension? The answers remain hidden in the shadows, in the darkness of Bellwood. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. If you have your own story, experiences, or evidence related to UFOs, please email us. Your story is important and can help others who have had similar experiences. UFO X-Files connects us. You are not alone.